Hey everybody, this is Ryan Steller. I'm here today with Michael Martinelli, and we are chatting about a very esoteric topic within federal regulation. Boring. The reason we're talking about it is because it has sweeping implications for many things in the American experience. So if you're an average citizen, this case we're going to talk about affects you. And the example that comes up is there's these hardworking fishermen up in Boston, and they're just busting their ass, getting up at 4 a.m. every day or whatever it is, going out on their boats in freezing cold water to fish cod and bring it back so you can have your $11.99 wild caught cod at Whole Foods, and they're scraping by to make a margin, and big bad federal government comes along and says you're overfishing, you're doing it wrong, and not only do we know about it, but we're going to actually enforce that you have an observer on your boat, and then you're going to have to pay the observer. So just imagine you're a small business person. This may be just you or one or two other employees or a partner, and all of a sudden there's a third head that obviously is going to destroy your margins. It's going to be extremely expensive. Not to mention you just feel like a child because you're being watched the whole time while you do your work, and all while you're in service of the American public and the average cod consumer. So that's a literal example, both from the heartwarming movie Coda and from a recent Supreme Court case, which was argued this week. And the case that's being argued has a few different defendants, as I understand it. I'm not we're not experts in general on this, and Mike is definitely 100 times the expert I am on this topic. The reason we're talking about it at all is because it's overturning a 40-year-old decision, and it can have sweeping effects on technology and your experience. Obviously, at Standard Care, we're most interested in healthcare, access to healthcare, ease of access to healthcare, your ability to understand it as an individual consumer, to make it affordable, and for everything to be to make sense when you peel back the layers and examine what's going on. And the decision that is being argued this week, frankly, was also, I think, also surprising to us. So it's not, I didn't think it was a thing that there was a lot of popular controversy or revolt against, but evidently there was. And some of the names that are involved, some of the plaintiffs, the companies that are behind this, may spark some millennial conspiracy theory vibes. But in general, it's a very big and important topic, and we're going to cover it over a series of these webcasts because we're trying to understand it better ourselves, and we'd like to do a service to anybody who's kind of in our orbit, who's interested in this stuff, but particularly some of the healthcare providers that we work with. And I'm just going to do a quick sound check because live streaming. Okay. All right. Sounds like it's good. Okay. Michael Martinelli, how you doing?
Good. How about you, Ryan?
I'm incredible. I'm not sleeping very much. I have a baby, as listeners may have heard, and babies don't sleep all the time, and I'm loving my life, but a little bit off my game, and just working to keep shipping software and solving problems and talking to customers and publishing this enriching media that we're doing here. And then the Eagles are out, right? Correct?
Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't bring that up. An end to their miserable second half of their season.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened there.
I don't either. I literally don't know. I just know that they lost. So cool. I don't know. Any
Well,
highlights?
it kind of cuts two ways. I was like, you know what? I before the game against Tampa Bay Monday, I was like, we know what's going to happen. Just lose and get it over with, and don't drag us somehow miraculously win, drag us all the way to like the NFC Championship or even the Super Bowl, and then completely let us down. Just like get it over with, and then I mean, so I'm trying to look at it in that light. But every morning since Monday, I'm checking my phone to see whether or not there's a headline where Coach Sirianni got fired or not. So,
All right. Sirianni is the head coach. Is the G? Oh,
yeah.
okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. So let's talk about Chevron. All right. Chevron Doctrine or Chevron deference is something that comes up a lot when we talk about AI in healthcare because there's not well, it doesn't come up a lot, but it's kind of like a foundational premise for AI in healthcare because the agencies that are expert on health data and passing around health data and privacy and that kind of thing um, benefit or get some of their power from Chevron deference. So I learned about it from Mike when we were working on one of our projects, but it applies to almost everything, and it's been in place for about 40 years. So it's something that most people have when their experience of the government and regulation includes Chevron doctrine. However, it's kind of a murky. It's a complex topic. Like it's thinking through it is actually really quite hard. Part of the reason we're talking about it at all is we are trying to train ourselves on it. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and he's going to kind of give us a little bit of a background, and then we're going to try and turn it into a bit of a discussion about how it relates to access to healthcare and provide some specific examples.
Okay, so just backing up, because Sean is in the field of law. It's like it's a big, well-known, established case, and the term Chevron deference is what we use here, and it has to do with the relationship between the separate powers, separate but equal branches of government we have, and we're talking here specifically at the federal level. So, just to give a very brief civics overview, just to lay some groundwork, we have three branches, like I said: the executive branch, which is the president and all the president's cabinets, the agencies, so like HHS, Department of Defense, etc. That's one branch. The second branch is the legislative branch, which is both the Senate and House of Representatives. And the third branch is the judiciary, which is the Supreme Court, the federal circuit courts, and all the federal district courts. And we're just talking about the federal government now. So, what happens here is this has to do with drafting new laws and putting them into a form in which they could be, once they're passed, enforced and regulated. So the way that a law is, the way that it begins is that it starts in one of the legislative houses. So either the House of Reps or the Senate. One house drafts the law. Say it gets passed, it then gets passed by that one house. So say the Senate drafts it, gets passed by the Senate, goes to the House, House votes on it, passes it, and then once it's passed by both houses after being written by the Congress, it goes to the president, and then the president can either veto or sign it into law. So say the president signs this statute into law. So you have a law now, but you can't really enforce it yet. There needs to be another step in order to put that law into the proper format for it to be enforceable. And the way that happens is by codifying that new statute into regulations. And it's the regulations are what's known as the Code of Federal Regulations. So the statutes are essentially translated from, the people in Congress. They're not all technical experts in different areas, sciences, environmental, stuff, engineering. So you have to look to the administrative agencies, which are part of the executive branch, to interpret the statute and translate it as closely as possible, to the intent of the law into a regulation to be codified. So this is where Chevron comes into play. Chevron deference means when a law goes before the is challenged in court, saying that, or when a regulation is challenged in court, saying that it is not reflective, or it doesn't represent the intent of the original statute drafted by the legislator, the court will, say, okay, first, we give Chevron deference, or deference to the administrative agencies and their expertise when drafting these regulations from the statutes. However, there's certain criteria that have to be met. There's a test that has to be met, and this involves what's known as the Administrative Procedures Act. That it's like a checklist that the court looks at to make sure that those regulations that are being challenged are legal. That means they don't, go too far off from what the legislator intended when they wrote the original statute. So this brings us to Chevron, which is a seminal case. Which the case was that Chevron versus, I think, the EPA, which is an executive agency. It introduced the term Chevron deference, given, the EPA, an executive branch, deference to their scientific and expertise relating to environmental issues when promulgating a regulation that was not favorable to Chevron, which is a major gas petroleum energy company. So that's the background. Hopefully that's wasn't too confusing. I tried to, make it as simple and involve as little information as possible, not get too far out in the weeds. But that's the framework for what we're going to be discussing here.
Yeah. So it's a lot. I've talked about this before, and I still zone out when we try and when we're doing the pre briefing for this. I'm still struggling with it, but the thing that makes this relatable is the idea of big government. So, as an individual citizen, if you've ever had the experience of being like, there's government overreach here, and it's not from like a court decision, but it's perhaps displeasingly, it's from like a non-elected official. It's coming from one of the agencies. That's where that power comes from, and I think I've heard stories where people have experienced regulation, and unintuitively there's not a precise law behind it. So they're like, why is this happening? And if you think through your own life, particularly perhaps in your work, like in a corporate setting, you'll probably run through a number of examples like these. So I guess, Mike, what is the and let's just start with the examples that are being argued in the case. So the first one is the fisheries example that we opened with. So it's not just a creative plot device from the 2021 film Coda. It is an actual lived experience in for fishermen. And is Loper the case that's being argued?
So Loper, this one is this case I pulled up is from a district court. I don't know if it might be in the federal circuit court, which is the step below the Supreme Court. But they're both Fisher cases.
They both
the
are.
other one I think that we were talking about, this one, Relentless Inc. versus Commerce Department. And by the way, Commerce Department in this one, Loper, Bright, enters versus Raimondo. Raimondo is the Secretary of Commerce, so they're both suing the Commerce Department.
Uh,
So this is the one where this is the most recent one, and this was a decision from the Third Circuit. So the next step of appeal for this would be to the Supreme Court, if they do intend to appeal it. It seems like there's some talk in the news that that is a possibility, but yeah, if this goes to the Supreme Court, then they're going to tack on. They're going to take enters v. Romano in there too.
so okay, so the what is the there was a big name, a big corporate name that everybody kind of remembers from scary Bush Iraq war days, which is the Koch brothers. Did you mention where were they mentioned in the case?
Oh, I saw that in on an article in like very first like few sentences that they didn't mention the brothers. I think it was just David Koch who was they were saying is putting a lot of the money behind these challenges.
Oh,
Basically, trying to finance these challenges to Chevron.
okay, okay, interesting. Okay, so the
Koch, yeah.
Koch, for people who don't know, the Koch brothers are a family whose corporation, Koch Industries, I believe their father started, and it was in the oil and gas industry, I think. And then I think they both studied chemical engineering at MIT or something like that. They're like in their 70s now, and they were extremely active in right wing politics. Through funding, teaching people how to get civically active and understand policy. Just picture like high net worth individuals sitting in conference rooms getting a seminar about how to become more politically influential, even at smaller scales, not at like huge national elections, like where the Koch brothers' names come up, but at smaller sort of regional and circuit decisions. So this is also sounds like this is the result also of what is now 15, 20 years of relatively grassroots work stimulated and led through the framework of the Koch brothers, which, depending on your politics, may or may not sound like a good thing. I think from a civic engagement perspective is a good thing, ironically, because it's at least getting people, it's helping people realize the power they have in the government and the ability to generate action locally. Like there's a saying that all politics is local, and it's really true. A lot of people, I think, underestimate what they can accomplish with local activism. So this is perhaps well, we'd have to confirm that, but this is perhaps the result of that long-term effort to educate people and smaller local industries and small business on how to do this. If it seems like that's what's going on, but I think that's also an interesting backstory here. So, Mike, what is the so what? Like, what is this? Why is this important? Or like, how can this be experienced? How can this be talked about in layman's terms?
So why this is important, I guess in layman's terms, and how it resonates with average people, is that I before I discussed the basics of how a law is made, Congress is writing and passing laws all the time, and many times they could be drafting and creating a law that has a direct impact on like many individuals, and it maybe you or even me, especially if for example when it comes to health and healthcare and medications and stuff. So I guess the best way to explain this is kind of illustrate with an example. So say the House of Representatives wrote a law, and the law included a provision where cancer patients get access, will automatically or are required to have access to this new cancer drug that has been shown to be very effective in bringing us the cancer into remission. So it gets passed by the House, passed by the Senate. The president signs it into law. Now you have the law there. Now, sitting there, when it's just sitting there as a law, there's nothing you could really do about it. You could say, yeah, the law, allows me to get. I have cancer. It says it requires that I'm able to access this, but there's no enforcement or regulatory mechanism to do that. So what happens when that law is passed is that it goes to HHS and some of the sub agencies, and then they interpret that law using their scientific and healthcare expertise into a regulation, a fine-tuned regulation that is actionable and enforceable. So that once it's a regulation, and that so what they did was they translated the layman's terms of the people who wrote it in Congress into more technical terms, but you put it in language that isn't as technical. They use their technical expertise to craft the regulation, so that now there's a regulation that was, you know, encoded by experts in the field based on the law that was passed, so that now, yes, now that it's a regulation and experts, translated it into this regulation, I can now effectively get access to this drug, which the law says I'm required to have access to. So it would matter to a regular citizen, because if it wasn't for the administrative agencies translating these laws into regulations using their technical expertise, the laws would do nothing for us. They'd be meaningless.
What? Okay, so if Chevron, and we should clarify that this is based on a news story. We're recording this based on a news story that Chevron might get overturned, but we won't know the court's final rulings and commentary until this session ends at the end of June. Correct, Mike?
Well, I don't think this is actually even made to the Supreme Court yet. I think
Oh,
it's I think they might have petitioned, but
we should. I feel bad. We
yeah,
should confirm that then.
yeah.
Okay.
I should have, that's on me. I should have checked that
Okay.
beforehand.
So it's hitting the news cycle because they're petitioning to get it to the Supreme Court.
Either they're petitioning or there's talk that they're going to petition for writ of
Mm.
cert.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So okay. So next step. So isn't it the case that this might, leaving it in place is good, because we don't, as a citizen, I don't have to wait for Congress, which is notoriously slow and has low satisfaction amongst the average citizen. I don't have to wait for Congress to write something into law. Isn't that better?
No, that's the thing. This is actually an important point. I'm glad you said that. Um, the regulations, they have to be like, this is what the courts look at when these regulations are challenged. They have to reflect the intent of the statute. Like an agency can't just write a regulation on anything they want to. It has to be based on a statute that was written by and then passed by both houses and the president into law. So like where you see a lot of litigation is if there's a agency that's making writing up a regulation based on a new law that's so far, removed from what the statute's intention is. That's when it would get knocked down. That's when you would look at the Administrative Procedures Act. The court would go through a test and say, okay, yes, you have Chevron deference, but you're essentially writing a new law by making a regulation that has barely anything to do with the statute. The regulations have to be grounded in the statute by Congress, constitutionally speaking, because the executive branch doesn't have the constitutional authority to write laws
Ugh.
and draft laws.
What
Yeah,
what is a statute? Stupid question.
statute, that a law. could
a
use
law.
them interchangeably.
Okay.
But, yeah,
So
U.S.
okay, my experience, the example that comes up for me a lot is in medical AI. A lot of people hate the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. They think of it as slow, ineffective, irrelevant. They cherry pick examples simultaneously where the FDA didn't get the right medication to market fast enough because they were too restrictive, and then they have other examples where the FDA let dangerous stuff get to market because they were not restrictive enough. The FDA has an extremely complex job, but within when we talk about AI and particularly like large language models, and making them safe enough to be used in clinical decision support or on your phone, at home, that is a conversation around making the artificial intelligence have the same judgment as a doctor, but as instead as inanimate code alone, and then it becomes a medical device, and it falls under 21 CFR 820, the code 21 CFR Code of Federal Regulations, Section 820, and then there's all these subsections, and that is a section of the regulations that has not changed in the 20 very much in the 20 so years I've been doing this, and the reason is it takes an act of Congress to change it. So for me and a lot of people I know who are doctors and engineers trying to build new innovative medical technology, there's a lot of frustration about that because it often seems 21 CFR 20 often seems inappropriate. It seems too heavy-handed, too slow, just too risk averse for software, even though because it's designed it was designed for hardware like stents and pacemakers and orthopedic implants, and it's not appropriate for things that are lower risk like software or whatever. So so I think that's an interesting case because the CFR is an actually remarkable amount of detail is locked in that section of the Code of Federal Regulations and has not changed. And because it takes an act of Congress, it's the whole industry basically keeps going like it's never going to change. Like it's very controversial and polarizing because you basically have people who are like the government, federal FDA is stupid, completely ignore it. Just release your Dr. AI on the internet. And then there's other people who are like, you're going to get smacked down for doing that. You think it's safe, but you actually have no idea. And the FDA also provides this framework in 21 CFR 820 for you to validate that it's safe, and you have to use that. And if you don't use that, we'll shut you down. We'll give you something called a 483, a letter to shut you down. And that's ultimately how Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos got caught, is they just kind of a routine, FDA ombudsman or whatever, I forget the auditor came in and was like, this is not legit, and gave them a 43, and then they proceeded to kind of take the company out from there, leading to fraud cases as far as I can tell. So I guess, Mike, I don't know, because at first it seems like it's going to be very. If Chevron gets overturned, it seems like it's going to be very inefficient. Like, does everything get pushed down to the states then, or like it just doesn't have a regulation? Like, will there just be a lot more things that doesn't have clarity on whether or not it's legal because it takes so much more effort to get Congress to like legislate on it?
Not like that. Congress is one piece of the puzzle. Congress can't compensate for what the administrative agencies have to do to make the regulations. It would just make for, like, unless somehow like Congress, I mean, that I don't know. I mean, maybe in the Constitution it doesn't prohibit Congress from encoding regulations from their statutes. I should know that, but it would. essentially it would be a mess. It would be chaos. The courts would be flooded with confusion as to how, you know, there's a statute. I don't know how is this supposed to be enforced? How do we interpret it? Like how like what's the framework we're supposed to look at? It would overwhelm the court system at all levels to the degree that like that's why I don't think Chevron deference, the doctrine, will get overturned, just because of the complete it's like mayhem essentially that it would cause, um, and the floodgates of litigation that would back up the court systems for probably years.
Is this potentially, we're gonna okay now we're gonna get into more speculative conversation. There are how many vacancies are there currently in the federal courts? A lot, right? Isn't it like 200 or
Oh,
something?
if you're talking about district courts and or circuit courts, yeah, there's always vacancies. That's then they're constantly getting, you're always, that's why every few weeks you hear about the president's appointing a new federal judge. But that's always the case. It's rare to have like a scenario where every single federal district court, which I believe there's 94, so that's the low level, the trial court where facts are, litigated, and then there's 13 federal circuit appeals courts, and then they have panels of judges, and then there's the Supreme Court. So we know there's no vacancies on the Supreme Court right now, but I would imagine where most vacancies are at the district courts.
Yeah, I think this no, there's nine there. Well, the relative proportion is kind of what's interesting, because this is often a topic. This is like the if you're an average Joe listening to this podcast, the judicial branch is often forgotten, but then because its decisions are so infrequent and so long standing, but it often ends up becoming very strategic. So we have these crisis situations in both of the major United States parties, Republican and Democrat, when a Supreme Court justice comes up. But the influence of policy through court precedent is heavily influenced by these districts, because the districts are pushing up to what the Supreme Court sees. So if you stuff, these district courts with your people, like your political party, you can more slowly and indirectly, but over time, affect the course of the what happens in the country. So there's 94 judicial districts and 55 of them are vacant. So that's
Oh,
most. I'm also kind of like, I never quite understood why they don't always get filled. I'm not really sure what is going on. Maybe they don't need to get filled, but it seems like a massive oversight. Like if Joe Biden is currently in power, and Joe Biden would like to get reelected, it seems like if I were Joe Biden, I would immediately put 55, and just 55 any Democrats filling a vacant seat is better than a vacant seat that could maybe get filled by a Republican. I would just shove in 55 Democrats and
well,
hope that they support, any challenges I have, to my nomination or whatever, right? Isn't that why isn't that happening?
so one reason it takes a while is because the president appoints the judges, but they have to be approved by the Senate. The Senate has to vote to confirm them. Also, the thing about the federal courts is that for each court, so you said there's 94, federal district courts. Um, there, so I'll just use in Pennsylvania where I live, east. Small states only have one federal district court. Larger states have a few districts. Here in Pennsylvania, I'm in the Eastern District, EDPA, Eastern District of Pennsylvania. That would be my federal district court. there's more than one judge that hears cases at that in the Eastern District in that federal court. It's just that that they have a few judges for each district court so that you could rotate, and then if a judge needs to recuse themselves for whatever reason, you could have another judge go in. But just because there's a vacancy doesn't mean there's no judges at all to hear cases at any of those districts. It's just that they're, I guess, a little short-staffed on judges, essentially.
So okay, I'm speaking out of turn, but that is always as you move towards middle age and year after year you hear about these stupid unappointed judges. You're like, why not? Why? Like, what the hell? Like, why isn't? Well, just do that. And then if clearly we have a partisan system, just shove in people for your party. Anyway, okay, so they are. Why am I bringing this up even? So they're currently pushing this up to the Supreme Court potentially. I guess what I'm trying to get at is this is potentially is it potentially a political strategy by the Koch brothers to like they're kind of like trying to like have like a death blow sort of, where it's like to like your conclusion is that the courts would be overwhelmed, and then if the courts are understaffed, it would be doubly so, right? Because it would be like a massive increase in the number of viable cases, and historically we've had only 39. Am I calculating that right? 39 out of the 50. No, what is 94 minus 50? Whatever 94 minus 55 is. We've only had 94 minus 55 of the seats filled. So it's kind of, if you're kind of like a small government person, you would look at this and go, oh yeah, this is gonna just destroy the ability to get anything done, which is a win if you're a small government person. Am I being too conspiratorial about that?
No, that sounds about right. In the politics game, yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. So the conversation, part of the reason we brought this up is within our nerdy little part of the world. We've been looking at we referenced Chevron in a white paper we wrote a couple of years ago. It helped provide some context for how health data privacy is currently implemented, and the conversation came up this week not only because of this these two cases that are calling to overturn Chevron, but basically asking the question like, what asset will gain the most value from regulatory changes resulting from the end of Chevron deference? What technologies impact will be stifled or amplified the most by Chevron being overturned? What will the biggest changes in cost, access, quality of care before and after Chevron is overturned? So that's a conversation we're not intellectually prepared to talk about right now. But if anybody out there actually is interested in talking about this, I bet 6 people will watch this video over the course of the next 20 years. But if you're one of them that wants to talk about this stuff, we would be very interested in meeting with you to talk about it, because the implications are manifold. It goes all over the place. I think to your point, so can you explain what stare decisis is for the audience?
Oh, stare decisis, that's basically so it's precedent set that is sent. We talk about case law. When we say just a law and a statute, that's law that's written by the legislator. And then there's also another form of law, which is case law. Actually, you know what? Oh, it's in this right here. Could you see my screen?
Yeah.
Case law. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about stare decisis. It means that it's not like a new like law that on the books, like a statute, but when the Supreme Court comes down with a ruling, like a landmark ruling such as Chevron Doctrine, that's a law, but like case law. And stare decisis means that when future courts review appeals cases, like on the Supreme Court, they look at decisions, precedent set by previous courts, which has been long standing. So that's
Yeah.
stare decisis.
So Chevron is most likely not to be overturned due to stare decisis, right?
Yeah, stare decisis is more of a term that describes um, how a judge or anyone views or like the act of interpreting previous case law.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's not like it's not a reason or a means of overturning something, unless I mean you could use it by saying like, oh, there's this other case law set by such and such courts through the process of stare decisis that I want to use in my argument to overturn Chevron.
To overturn
So
Chevron. To overturn Chevron. So, okay. So, what would have to be, without thinking about it too much, what would have to be true, you think, in order for the it's the plaintiffs, right? Because the government is the defendant, isn't
yeah,
it? Yeah. So
yes.
the Department of Commerce in particular here is the defendant, but what would the plaintiffs have to do in order to get the Supreme Court to turn this over?
So so here's another important thing. I should have mentioned this earlier. So in the court system, just a brief overview, in the federal courts, there's the district court, which we talked about, which is a trial court. The lowest court, and this is in states and localities as well, you hear a trial court. That's where litigation actually happens. That's where facts are brought in, facts are litigated, that you have a jury makes a decision, and then that's that. Once the decision is made at a trial court, in the federal context, a federal district court, that decision can be appealed. So in federal court, you would appeal it. So if I'm Eastern District of PA, I believe I would be the Third Circuit. I would appeal up to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, appeal the decision from the trial court. In an appeal, at an appeal court, you can't bring in new evidence. There's no jury. It's only a review of the record of everything that occurred in the trial court. So, and that the circuit court looks at that, say they affirm the decision of the trial court, which the plaintiffs didn't want. They could appeal one more time up to the Supreme Court, and they take another look at it. So if the Supreme Court were to rule in the plaintiff's favor, they would say like, okay, yes, the trial court erred in making this ruling or whatever. So the ruling is overturned, void. They overturn the ruling of the trial court, and then that's what the plaintiffs would be looking at. It's not like the Supreme or any appeals court could grant. They could, I guess, in some cases, grant injunctive relief in terms of when there's pending cases, but it's not like they could order somebody to go to jail or offer damages. That's only at the trial court level.
Okay, so what would the I don't know, speculating obviously, where would the plaintiffs have to take this in order to get Kagan, Kavanaugh, Sotomayor, the folks on the Supreme Court now to overturn Chevron?
Well, it's also and the lawyers, this is the game they're gonna play, is, and whenever in federal court there has to be a constitutional federal question, and here it's clearly there's a constitutional issue Administrative Procedures Act, Chevron Doctrine, that all involves, separation of powers. Uh, they know going in to say they were granted certiorari to for their case to be heard by the Supreme Court, which means that it's basically you apply to have your case heard to the Supreme Court, and then as long as at least 4 of the Supreme Court judges agree to hear the case, they issue a writ of certiorari, meaning okay, we're going to hear your appeal. So the makeup of the Supreme Court is always a calculation for the lawyers to hear the plaintiffs. So they're going to, go push on a constitutional issue that would resonate more with a conservative leaning ideology. So even if the regardless of what the party of the lawyers for the plaintiffs were, they know like that's what you have to do in order to get the win here in the Supreme Court. You have 6 leaning right, 3 leaning left. So that's the calculation they always take into account. So you're going to use a constitutional argument that would resonate more with the majority on the Supreme Court. So here it would be,
and we'll just to reiterate, this is John Roberts is the Chief Justice, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, Neil M. Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Ketanji Brown Jackson are the current justices.
Yes. Yep.
So if in front of those folks, remind me, who's the plaintiff in here again? It's there's 2 cases. What's the one, the fish?
They're both fish cases, but the most recent one they were looking at is called Relentless Inc.
Relentless Inc. Okay, so you're Relentless. You're the lawyer for Relentless. You're going up against
the Commerce Department.
You're going up against the Commerce Department, but in front of Kavanaugh, Barrett, Jackson, Gorsuch, Kagan. Okay, so how you and Sotomayor? So how do you appeal to those folks?
So I appeal to those folks. Well, I'm going to appeal, not to all of them. I'm going to appeal to the group of them, the majority of them that share a similar political ideology. It might be more like 5. Roberts could be more of a swing vote, but appeal to at least 5 of the more right-leaning judges by crafting a constitutional argument that is favorable to a more conservative type ideology. And I would go directly to, separation of powers. That's a big thing, which, if you boil it down, limited government. So in the framework of limited government, if you have the executive branch here, which they would claim here, making new rules that aren't based on a statute, that's government overreach. So that's how you would approach that, and that involves that would bring in the Chevron Doctrine, because what they're appealing for, the appeal is for some rule. I forget the exact rule. It had to do with the fishing regulations or whatever that were, the regulation was created by some fishing national.
Go ahead. NRDC? No.
That was the Chevron, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, I believe.
Yeah.
And the National Marine Fisheries Service, which are executive branch agencies enforcing regulations from a law that they drafted regulations for, which the plaintiffs are going to say these regulations that they're enforcing, or the way that they're enforcing them, do not reflect the intent of the legislator, the legislative intent when they wrote the statute. They're acting in a manner in which the executive branch, these agencies, are, arbitrarily making their own new laws and regulations and enforcing those instead. And that's like the general angle they would take, to sway those, 5 or 6 judges,
Okay.
which is a
And
violation of separation of powers.
okay, so Mike is available as special counsel for the plaintiff's legal team. So the thing that is okay. So now I'm learning more about this. This is a very interesting case because it's kind of a conversation that happens a lot in in regulation in general, but it's very. I feel like it's a very like American 20th century story where you have an everyman, small business owner going up against a regulation, and the purpose of that regulation is to protect the greater good, sometimes against a risk that is very hard to calculate or understand intellectually, or it's not intuitive, and is potentially existential. And I'm realizing we didn't talk about the other side of the case, which is there's these fishermen that are getting beaten down by this burden of having this observer. But why does Department of Commerce, on behalf of the American public, want to put that burden on them? And it's because fisheries, if they're overfished, collapse, and we could have a massive extinction event, and lose years, maybe decades, of accessible fisheries and a whole food source. So it feeds into food stability, and then reducing that supply would obviously raise the cost. So instead of $11 a pound, your cod would be $20, $30 a pound. Maybe you just couldn't find it anywhere. So the government is trying to step in here and prevent that sort of squishy but potentially massive risk in this complex system, which is ocean fisheries, with a control mechanism, which are these observers. But the observers have salaries and they get paid. So who pays for it? They're putting the burden on the small business person. So this is like this is a very classic kind of American story. I'm thinking of also there was this story. My grandfather worked at Mack Truck, the American 18-wheeler and kind of heavy duty trucking manufacturer. And there was a story about how they would just go dump the paint from the paint shop behind the building for like 40 years, from like the 30s until like the 70s. And there was just, a lot of anger and like misunderstanding because somebody came in and was like, you can't just like dump vehicle paint into the ground, like in this, this like suburban Pennsylvania town. Like it's going to eventually kill you because you work here every day. It's going to kill the fish that this groundwater runs into, and then the people who work around here. So who was right and who was wrong? It's like, well, in an ideal world, Mack Truck would have thought ahead, not dump the paint there, or once they were, somebody should have caught that earlier. That was definitely an oversight, but the government had to step in. So yeah, okay. So if it's the government versus a corporation, you're like, okay, whatever. But if it's government versus a small business person or an individual or family business, that is somewhat worse. So I guess the Koch brothers here are kind of. This is really interesting because I think this there was a meme from one of the Bush. I think it was like the Obama's 2008, whenever Obama got elected, from Joe the plumber, and Joe the plumber was a Republican, and Joe was I don't know what Joe was pissed about, but whatever. Joe had like back taxes. Joe had conflicting narrative anyway, but constant narrative about small and local business, family business versus government overreach, and then Chevron would pull that back. It would like pull that back, but then if you're a citizen and you're, you know, where do you get the protection then?
True. One just quick note to Joe the plumber actually passed away about a month ago, so uh, wish him and his
Did
family.
you know him?
No, I just remember when it was back on the news way back, in the day, and then I saw it a small news push headline mentioned he was pretty young too. I think he's in his late 50s.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
All right, quite the callback. I did not think we were going to talk about Joe the plumber, but anyway, so where, from the average citizen, Chevron gets Koch brothers and the fishermen win. Supreme Court overturns Chevron after 40 years. How do I, as the average citizen, get expertly guided safety?
So here's, just before I answer that, just so the people are clear who may be listening, uh, if anyone is listening, is that this when you have a case um, go to Supreme Court and they overturn something, they don't always or have to necessarily overturn the entire doctrine. So say overturn all of Chevron. If something's overturned, turned in this case, which I think might happen, it would be it would be much more narrow. It would be specific to the actual, regulations at issue with these fishing companies. Um, they could overturn parts of, the they could overturn parts of like their case when it was at trial court, and maybe they might not even touch the Chevron doctrine. Um, it would be a big step to overturn Chevron just for this. But I guess if, hypothetically speaking, they did overturn Chevron. Um, sorry, right? What was your question again? If they,
So I don't, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, but my interpretation is that average citizen, Chevron is working in my favor. Chevron doctrine is working in my favor because somebody who actually knows what the hell they're talking about at the Department of Energy, at the FDA, at whatever, is making a call on average. They're screwing it up. Let's say they're screwing it up 20% of the time. On average, though, the expert is probably making the right call compared to Congress. So am I going to lose the benefit of those correct calls the vast majority of the time now if Chevron gets overturned?
yes, I mean, yes, pretty much, because then it would be up to, you would only have the legislator actually have interpretive rulemaking, some degree of interpretive rulemaking, but essentially you would have people who aren't experts, technical experts in, all these areas, making regulations for these laws that don't make sense or could be harmful, or they won't be able to be they won't even be able to do it in general. So yes, it would harm the average citizen, especially.
Does it push it down to the states then?
No, oh yeah, I meant to bring it up. That's a separate issue, a 10th Amendment issue. Um, that would be a separate issue brought being brought to the Supreme Court, where um, this wouldn't be a matter of, well, yeah, I think they already established that there's interstate commerce going on here with the fisheries and everything, but where it could possibly be, raise a state rights issue, a 10th Amendment issue, is if you're in some body of water and say like one of the middle states, I don't know, like Kentucky, somewhere in the middle of the country, where it's a body of water and some of it is either leans up against, or part of that body of water is in like a federally protected land, or maybe like a federal or national park. So they would there, if the fisheries were in that body of water and they were saying like, oh, the water we were fishing in, it wasn't part of the national park, but in, I've seen cases kind of like this before, but they're saying like, oh, all the water, it's all, the one water molecule doesn't just stay still, it all moves around, so it's all the water's touching the federal, going through the federal, territory and out of it. So that's a way that you could bring up a states' rights issue, is arguing that the federal government did not have the right to enforce a law in that particular, enforce a federal law in that particular state's like lake. um that's a whole nother uh
So,
election.
well, but I mean, like, I guess I'm thinking about safety. Is like, would it come down to, because oftentimes a lot of people, myself included, forget that the federal government is not the only person making laws. In fact, you have a lot of layers. You have federal, state,
Yes.
county, local, and maybe municipal. So you actually have at least, like, average American at least has 5 layers of lawmaking.
Yep.
So I guess not so much a states' rights issue, but just kind of like, if I'm experiencing something, like I'm thinking like California in particular. California legislates a lot of things. For example, just yesterday, Gavin Newsom struck down a ban on youth football, which is, due to the issues with concussion, I could see why people would want to ban youth football. But as an American of a given age, I'm shocked that a bill even got to a governor's desk. And I was surprised to hear that. So, but he struck it down. But that type of safety, right? So there's a bunch of parents going, we need this bill so that our kids are safer. And the federal government is not doing it. And perhaps if there was a congressional action on youth sports, it would get deferred to the HHS or Department of Education or something, and then they would do something. But if Chevron gets overturned, they wouldn't have jurisdiction to do something absent Congress.
Jurisdiction.
Yeah.
I
So
want to
then,
stop you there,
yeah,
because that's actually the issue here. The
okay,
federal government, in order for the federal government to pass a law or a regulation that affects, that applies to everyone in the country, they first have to have jurisdiction. And one of the most common ways to establish jurisdiction is to show that in some part of the process of what they're regulating, there's interstate commerce between states, going between, different states. And there's other ways to establish federal jurisdiction. Here, that's not an issue. The reason this is started in federal court is because it was it was based on a federal regulation that they didn't object. They weren't objecting that the federal government didn't have jurisdiction in making those regulations to these fishermen, these fish commercial fish companies. So, it, because the government had jurisdiction to create the law, and that's been established, that you won't see that come up as an issue again. But it's not like it doesn't come up. Whenever you have new laws, there's always challenges to whether or not the federal government properly had jurisdiction to create a law. Like, for example, banning, if there was a congressional law to ban youth sports or youth football, I don't see how they could establish jurisdiction to make that law, because for all we know, I mean, football, you can have travel teams going between states, but it's it's a local activity,
okay,
essentially is what it is.
all right. I don't. All right, I think we should probably wrap it there. Should probably wrap it there. Okay, so we're gonna revisit this. I jumped the gun a little bit. I think I didn't realize that this was being surfaced to the Supreme Court. I thought it was already at the Supreme Court. So we'll keep an eye on it. In any case, understanding Chevron, I think it's relevant. If you do anything, which is really most industries, if you think about it, where federal regulation is relevant, but super particularly in healthcare, and a lot of it's been proposed by a diverse set of audiences. Chamath Palihapitiya, the famous venture capitalist from the All In podcast, proposed regulating artificial intelligence the way we do medical devices, so that CFR regulation I talked about, the exact same one, is a candidate for regulating large language models like ChatGPT, Llama, Mistral, Anthropic, and all these things. So MedPalm. So this is an active debate, and we would be in, if Chevron was overturned, AI would be in, so if you're a technologist on the call, if you're just a nerd or EAC, if you're an effective accelerationist singularity person in the audience, Chevron is relevant to you because you would be essentially asking Congress to regulate large language models when they can barely figure out their Wi-Fi. So it's relevant to everybody, but particularly in healthcare. So we're going to keep an eye on it. It's good to contemplate in general, but probably too in the weeds for day to day, except for unless it becomes newsworthy sometime soon. All right, Michael, excellent work. Anything you want to say before we leave?
Just want to mention I found this good document. It's called Chevron Deference, a Primer. I'll send that to you in Slack, and if you want to post it with the recording of this video on YouTube, that could be a good resource for people to look at.
Right on. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. If you made it this far, please reach out, ask us a question, put a comment down below, or email us at hello@standardcare.us. Please like and subscribe.